Where did you grow up?
I grew up in South Alabama, a small town, Elba. It's right on the bottom of the state, close to Florida.
I might have family there. My family is originally, well, not originally from, but I have a lot of family in Tallahassee.
Oh, okay.
And in a town called Calvary, Georgia.
Yeah, 90 miles from Tallahassee. As a matter of fact, I wanted to go to FAMU because it was close. But my daddy said, you going to an A&M, but it's going to be Alabama A&M because he was paying for my brother and myself. That was 300 miles away on the top of the state, Huntsville.
Right. So what led you on this journey, on the global justice or the social justice journey?
Well, I was asked to collect data for a lawsuit that my wife had filed back in 1979, and she needed someone to gather the data for her lawsuit. It was a lawsuit, the first lawsuit in the U.S. to challenge environmental racism using civil rights law. And so I'm a trained sociologist, and a lot of my research focuses on housing and residential patterns. And so I basically transferred my skills to look, instead of looking at housing discrimination, looking at environmental discrimination. I had 10 students in my research methods class at Texas Southern University, and I designed a study, and we basically mapped where all the landfills and incinerators and garbage dumps are located in Houston. That was back in 1979.
Okay. When did you realize that you had made a difference?
Well, it was something that I didn't plan on this trajectory of my career. It was something that just happened. And when I looked at the data and the study that we did in Houston 41 years ago, the results and the findings were so glaring, but yet still this federal judge said this was not discrimination. We found that 100% of all the city-owned landfills were located in Black neighborhoods. 6 out of 8 of the city-owned incinerators were in Black neighborhoods. And 3 out of 4 of the privately owned landfills were in Black neighborhoods. And from the 20s up until 1978, 82% of all the garbage dumped in Houston was dumped in Black neighborhoods, even though Blacks only made up 25% of the population. And after that judge said this was not discrimination, being a sociologist, I want to know, if this is not discrimination, then what is? And so I expanded the Houston study to look at the Southern United States, and I found the same pattern across the Southern United States. And that's how the book Dumping in Dixie: Race, Class, and Environmental Quality came about in 1990. And there were no studies that looked at these issues, and there were no books on this. And my book was the first book. And so my thing is, why is this so invisible? Why is it such a glaring form of racism, but there's hardly anything written about it? And I knew then and there that would be the area that would be the focus of my research. And it has been the focus of my research since 1978.
Okay. Where would you see in the U.S. that needs the most immediate help?
If you look at how pollution and environmental degradation will map closely with race, in the areas where you have lots of housing discrimination and residential segregation and other forms of disenfranchisement for people of color, you'll find that's where you have the greatest concentration of environmental injustice. whether it's in the southern United States with African Americans, or on the U.S.-Mexican border with Latinos, or in the plains in terms of native indigenous folks. And so the fact that systemic racism will drive pollution in the direction of the path of least resistance. And historically, that has meant poor people and people of color. And because of the way that policies are made and the way the laws are enforced or not enforced, you'll see that you could map this in a way that is very clear, very systematic, and in many ways very intentional, not accidental, not coincidental, but very intentional. So I'd say if you talk about regions, the Southern United States is a region that has the most egregious forms of environmental racism because of the legacy of Jim Crow, of the Confederacy, resistance to civil rights, equal protection, lax enforcement of environmental laws, et cetera. And so you can see a pattern that will just stick out. And then you start looking at cities and rural areas. And then you start looking at cities, you look at states that have small people of color population. And if you drill down in those states, I say Oregon, you'll find that the people, even though the percentage of population, you got to go and find them, you can find the environmental hazards are greater proportion where people of color and poor people are. So it's not just the Southern thing. It's not just a big city thing. You can also discover these issues in terms of the racial and class dynamics that make people in places more vulnerable.
Okay, so that judge that ruled that wasn't discrimination, did you ever get to face him and challenge that as far as that particular choice that he made, or what happened with that particular situation?
Well, the case went to the case was filed in federal district court in Texas, and this was 1979. And I don't know when you were born. What year were you born?
83.
Okay, this was before you were born. 1979 in Texas, in the Deep South, was not a time when federal judges wanted to see discrimination. And so this is a time when the judge was calling the plaintiffs in the case, the class action lawsuit, the residents that filed the case, being Margaret Bean et al. Again, it was a class action suit, so it was the community that filed the lawsuit. The judge, this old white man, must have been 100 years old. I'm exaggerating, but anyway, he was calling us niggers. You niggers be quiet. I know what that nigger neighborhood. And if you know anything about the South, if you're called a nigger, that's tantamount to the N-word. The case went to court in 1985, and it was appealed and to the Fifth Circuit, which is in New Orleans, and it came back. We lost on appeal. This case, and with the evidence that we had, it was too soon for us to win. Sometime you're ahead of your time. If you look at those data that we had, that I presented, and you push it out today, you would see that we would probably win that case in court, because I've testified in cases after 1985, and we won cases. We stopped facilities, but again, 1979 and 1985 was just too soon, and we could not get any environmental groups to help us. When I showed them that data, I told them what the research was, what the findings, and one of the white groups leaders said, "Well, isn't that where the landfill's supposed to be?" I said, "Oh, okay. We're 25% of the population, but 82% of all the garbage dumped, since the 20s and up to 1978, been dumped in Black neighborhoods." He said, "Well, isn't that where the garbage is supposed to be?" We went to one of the oldest civil rights organizations, the NAACP. Again, this is 1979. And we were told we don't work on environmental issues. We do housing discrimination, education, employment, voting. And so it took almost 2 decades before the environmental movement and the civil rights movement got it, understood how these things are connected. And there's still some hesitancy for some of the environmental groups, conservation groups, to embrace or to even address systemic racism when it comes to environmental protection. And so you know, I'm talking about 30 years ago. But if you look at right now in 2021, there are some groups that do not want to touch issues around race and issues around issues that impact poor people when it comes to environmental protection. We've made a lot of progress, but we still got a long way to go. A long way to go.
Do you remember that case? If I was able to look it up.
Yeah, BEAN versus Southwestern Waste Management Corporation.
Western Waste
Management Corporation.
What? So I don't know how often you come up to Eugene, but what are your thoughts of Eugene in general?
Well, I've been to Eugene, University of Oregon, at least a half dozen times. And Oregon is very different from Texas and Alabama and Georgia, where I've done most of my work. But again, the issues around environmental justice are not limited to any region or any state. I know there are environmental justice issues in Oregon, and I know there are groups working on environmental justice. And I've worked with a couple of professors in Oregon, Robin and Bob Collins. I've known them for at least 25 years. And some of the work that they've done, their writing and the work that they've done in the state. But I do know that the issues around housing, residential segregation, the issues around enforcement issues and access to environmental amenities, this is not something that is just unique to cities outside of the Northwest or the West or the West. These issues are pervasive across. And again, as I said, if you even looking at a city like Portland, you can map where the most environmental sensitive areas are and map where people of color are, and I would suspect that you would find greater vulnerabilities in terms of environmental stressors in those areas where you have the highest concentration of people of color. I've had a number of students from Portland and the neighborhoods where they are, and they told me some of the issues, and I said, "Oh, there are Black people in Portland." They said, "Yeah, Dr. Bullard, of course." I knew that.
There's not many of us.
I know.
Wow, we get used to.
Yeah.
So I just have one more. Actually, if you have a statement that you'd like to give to people who might not be familiar with you or your work, what would you like to tell them?
Well, I'd like to say to those folks who are concerned about the environment and concerned about justice, our environmental justice movement was very methodical and very targeted about addressing environmental issues that impact poor people and people of color and marginalized communities. And we are unapologetic about our quest for a clean and healthy environment for all. And if just because you may not have a lot of money, or just because you may be physically located in in a neighborhood that may not be the wealthiest, that does not mean that you and your residents don't have a right to a clean, a healthy, nourishing, and an environment that is sustainable for you and your family, and for your relatives and future generations. That's what we fight for. That's what we are working for, and that's what keeps me going in terms of trying to make a difference. And I do believe that one person can make a difference, and if you work as a collective in an organization, you can make things better for all.